Welcome to the International Speakers Series, Citizen Diplomacy and Human Rights. How does Amnesty International fit in? I'm Mae Ferguson and I'm delighted to have you with us today. First, I want to give you just a short overview about Fort Worth Sister Cities and International in case you're not familiar with it, but in an increasingly divided world, Fort Worth Sister City International brings individuals, cultures, and countries together for the benefit of all. We manage the City of Fort Worth's 9 sister city relationships around the world, and that is only made possible because of the support we get from the members' circle of giving. And I know many of you are in the audience today listening to the presentation, and I just want to tell you how much we appreciate your support. If you're not a member and you would like to join with the people you see on the screen, you can easily go to our website at fwsistercities.org and you will find plenty of information there. And if you do join now, there's several other events coming up in the near future, including a Bastille Day celebration next month, a sake tasting in August, our annual meeting in September, and then in November, of course, our Mayor's International Dinner, where we'll get to welcome our brand new mayor and honorary chair of Fort Worth Sister Cities International, Mayor Maddie Parker. At the end of Mr. De Souza's presentation, we will have about a 15-minute Q&A session led by our chair-elect, Greg Jackson. So if you have any questions that come to mind during the presentation, please put them in that box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to all of them if possible. So now let me please introduce to you Roger Mark De Souza, the Chief Movement Building Officer at Amnesty International. Roger Mark De Souza oversees research and programs designed to document human rights abuses and directs Amnesty International's USA's work to grow diversity, train, and deepen the engagement of its membership base to leverage grassroots activism from the local to the global level. That's a mouthful, but he'll explain that when he gets on. For 25 years, he has been in leadership positions in the nonprofit sector, including Sister Cities International, which is where I got to know him when he served as president and CEO. He also served in the Woodrow Wilson Center, the Population Action International, Sierra Club, Population Reference Bureau, and the World Resources Institute. He is committed to promoting inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility through allyship, service, and organizational action stems from his lived experiences, his community engagement, and his deep desire to improve the welfare of diverse populations. De Souza leads with integrity and passion, and he brings to bear his contagious laugh, energy, and drive to engage others, lift their aspirations, and deliver on key programming objectives. Outside his professional life, he thrives on his Caribbean heritage, loves to cook, is an avid traveler, and enjoys the outdoors with his wife, sons, and rescue dogs. So let me stop and now introduce my friend, Roger Mark De Souza.
Thank you so very much, Mae. It really is wonderful to be here with you today. Thank you for the kind invitation. I feel almost as if I'm coming back home. So thank you for that warm home welcome. And it's I'm so appreciative to see the supporters for the work in Fort Worth. Really so critical. Our friends like Ray and Michael Hyatt, Mary Palico, and so many important people that continue to recognize and value the work that you do enforce work, but the importance of citizen diplomacy and what it means for us in today's world. So thank you for the excellent work and support that you're all doing. I'm just delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit today about the work that I'm currently doing at Amnesty International. And as we pull up this, I have a few slides and a couple of short video clips I'd like to share with you. But as we pull up the first slide of the video of the presentation, I'd like to pose this question to you: citizen diplomats and human rights, where does Amnesty International fit in? And in our chat today, there are three things I hope you will take away from this presentation: that you will come away with a sense of who Amnesty International is, what we do, and finally, you would have a sense of what are some of the links between your interests and engagement and support of Sister Cities International, and how does that link to the work that Amnesty International does. So let me start with the next slide and tell you a little bit about who we are. So Amnesty International is a grassroots membership-based organization. We have more than 7 million supporters, activists, and volunteers in 150 countries, and we operate independently from government, corporate, or national interests. We have offices and operations in more than 70 countries. So what do we do? This next slide presents a little bit of our vision. We are primarily a human rights organization, and our vision is a world in which every person, regardless of race, religion, gender, or ethnicity, enjoys all the human rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights standards. There are 30 human rights obligations that are articulated in this declaration. And there are things like all human beings are born free and equal. There's a recognition by just the virtue of your birth, you're entitled to these rights. Everyone has the right to marry and have a family. Everyone has the right to education. Everyone has the right to own property. We're all equal before the law. Everyone has the right to a life lived in freedom and safety. Everyone has the right to be free from slavery. Everyone has the right to be free from torture. So these are a set of guidelines that are enshrined in this international declaration that form the basis for the work that we do at Amnesty International. So really our guiding operating principles around international human rights law. How do we translate these agreements and these laws to make a difference in someone's life? I'd like to tell you a little bit about what motivates average citizens to get involved in this work as you look at this next slide and hear the story of Mario, who tells a little bit of his experience. So listen and we'll continue to chat.
Hi, my name is Shannon.
I'm Tom Benner.
Tika Ferguson.
Haji.
Carol.
Ali.
Elizabeth Francis. And I'm a member of Amnesty International.
Because
I can't just sit by and let all of these human rights abuse violations happen.
Because
I believe in justice. Because
I was outraged at the injustice and oppression in the world.
Because
I do want a world that I haven't seen yet. I am a survivor of torture. I am a survivor of the concentration camps. I was severely tortured for about 2 months, interrogation and obviously torture sessions. I survived from that center, and I say I survived because many others didn't make it. A lot of people that were with me there were either made disappear or just literally were killed, most of them in front of me. I think that the physical torture, you're always able to recover somehow. but on the psychological torture, it's much difficult to recover. It will stay with you forever, I think. So you have just to learn how to live with that. I always think that I am a survivor, so I should work on behalf of human rights. It's kind of my duty, I would say, as a survivor. And when I say a survivor, it's really in the context of the world, because I don't feel like I am a victim of torture. Even without my own experience, I would have been always concerned about the well-being of other people. And I hope that many others will join us in this campaign working for human rights. I'm so proud to be a member
From Amnesty International.
Because I know my support helps make Amnesty International successful.
Because it allows ordinary people to mobilize for human rights.
Because together we're a force for good in the world.
Thank you very much. So that gives you a sense of the mission of Amnesty International and how we translate that mission into action, and the work that we do in terms of saving people's lives, freeing individuals from torture, and ensuring that they have meaningful lives that they can resume and continue to engage and be productive citizens. So we really operate at the level of individuals, but globally, we do a lot of work and advocacy where we work towards some global wins. So on this next slide, what you will see is a sense of what some of these wins look like. So you've heard from Mario, who is a torture survivor. So we have launched the campaign to stop torture. It was launched in 1972, and 12 years later, the United Nations voted to combat torture worldwide with a convention against torture in 1984. We have a very active campaign to abolish the death penalty. We launched the first campaign against the death penalty in 1980. And when we started in 1961, only 9 countries had abolished state executions. By 2018, that figure had risen to 106, with around 2/3 of the world abolitionists in practice. We also had a campaign for an international criminal court, and then we launched this in 1993, and this is an opportunity for there to be legal proceedings against those who are responsible for genocides and war crimes to justice. It was established in 2002. I'd like to give you an example of how we look at a particular issue and some of the work that we do behind it to draw support and get individuals involved. So if you look on this next slide at our campaign for an arms trade treaty, after 20 years of pressure from Amnesty supporters, a life-saving global arms trade treaty came into force on the 24th of December 2014. It will help stop the flow of weapons fueling atrocities around the world. Part of what we did in terms of our messaging and positioning on this issue, as you will see in this next slide, is to look at ways that different global protections have been put in place vis-a-vis certain products and on the trading market globally. And we actually drew a parallel between weapons and bananas. So we recognize that weapons had weaker global trade regulations than bananas. And we looked at some of the messaging around what this meant, so that we looked at impacted communities and countries, but also used this to help bring the message home. This was very successful. It was a very successful approach to how we developed the message, and we were able to help mobilize our activists to take action on this. So the wins that we have are global in nature. They address global policies, but we very much center on individuals. On this next slide, you will see some of individual wins that we have managed to help support. So in Nigeria, we have the example of Moses, who after 10 years in jail, his life was spared after officials received more than 800,000 messages from activists around the world. He had been falsely accused of stealing 3 mobile phones. Albert Woodfox, here in the United States, spent more than 43 years in solitary confinement. It's believed to be the longest anyone has survived in solitary in our country. And we have a program called Right for Rights, where it's a letter writing campaign, and we had more than 240,000 letters were sent in support for his release, and he was released in 2016. Here we have another example of Teodora del Carmen Vasquez, who was freed from prison in El Salvador in 2018. Teodora suffered a stillbirth, and because of that stillbirth, she was sentenced to 30 years for aggravated homicide under strict anti-abortion laws in El Salvador. She spent more than a decade behind bars. We took up her case, and a number of individuals were able to write in and help get her released. We have torture victims, such as Jeremy Corey, who spent years in prison after being tortured and confessing to a crime that he didn't commit. This took place in the Philippines, and he was subsequently released. So we get these types of individuals released. So we work on global wins. We work on freeing prisoners of conscience. So these are individuals that you see who have stood up for their human rights and have been imprisoned for it. And on this next slide, you have a sense of some of the issues that we work on. So in the international agreements in the Universal Declaration, it is a human right for people to be able to move freely across the world. Everyone has a right to freedom of movement and residence within the border of each state, country, and everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. So we have been looking at Amnesty International of cases of families who have been imprisoned in ICE detention facilities and who have undergone forced separation of their families. So in this next slide, we worked with refugees or asylum seekers from Central America. And this is the case of a young boy, Jose, who was 1 year old, who while he was in detention became very ill and was sent to hospital for 5 days. He was on a breathing machine, and he was sent back to the Diddy Family Detention Center in Texas. He deteriorated again and had restricted breathing. His mother, Paola, was approached by ICE detention officials, and they said to her, well, we can release him on his own, but you will not be released as a family. So our campaigning generated more than 38,000 actions in just over a month. And eventually the decision was made that Paola and Jose would be freed as a family from ICE detention in respect of their human rights. So when we work on these kinds of cases and these kinds of situations, how do we do our work? What are we, how do we approach this work? And how do we know that our work is accurate and evidence-based? In this next slide, we share with you some of the way that change happens for us. It's based on research. Human rights change starts with the facts. We gather accurate facts, we cross-check it, and we present it in the context of human rights law. We do advocacy and lobbying work. So we want our analysis to influence and press governments to meet their obligations to international human rights agreements. And then we have a number of campaigns and actions where we mobilize activists and our members to take action. So I'll give you an example of how these various components come into play. And on this next slide, let's have a look at some research that we do. So if we decide that we're going to look at a particular issue to determine if there is a human rights violation, what needs to happen, typically we do this through various methods. We will crowdsource information to find out from individuals who are observing what's happening to determine whether there are enough witnesses and evidence. We will do work around remote sensing to get a sense of what actions are being taken place. And then we have a digital verification core that does some satellite and verification work digitally to confirm that acts are taking place. Across the world, we have regional hubs that serve as centers of excellence and collection for information. For the Americas, our regional hub is in Mexico City. So anything that happens in the United States, we always coordinate with our regional hub. We also have country sections, and these are our offices. So I work with Amnesty International USA, which is one of the largest sections or offices in the global movement. Now, because we are a grassroots volunteer organization, very much like Sister Cities International, we have volunteer leaders, and many of these are individuals who are aware of situations in countries. They are our country specialists, or they're specialists on particular thematic issues, and they serve as a reference and further validation. So I also have a short video clip to show you how this type of research and verification occurs. So if you listen for a little bit, you'll have a sense of how our research works in some geographies. this is very important because we work closely with a digital verification group of experts that we have based in our headquarters in our international secretariat in London. In addition, we work with a number of graduate schools and colleges whereby we bring students on board to train them in digital verification methodologies. And they form part of our research teams that help to digitally confirm that these events are taking place. That digital verification is always double-checked against communities who are witnessing the events in person and in-depth interviews that are carried out. So within Amnesty International USA, the research team is under my direction, and they're very often deployed to specific locations, working closely with our global experts to verify what is happening. How does this translate into recent events for us, for example, in the United States? I'd like to share with you in this next slide a little bit of how we mapped police violence across the United States when we were looking at police violence against protesters for Black Lives. We looked at 500 videos that we analyzed, and this was documentation of events that were occurring. We were able from these videos to get enough evidence to document 125 incidents of police violence, and these were occurring in 40 states and in Washington, D.C. And we were able to look at examples of police violence that were committed by federal agencies, state and local police departments, and National Guard soldiers. So in the next slide, we took some of that information and together with interviews, in-depth interviews and testimonials that we were able to verify, determined where the cases were of the greatest incidents of police violence. And we produced a digital map that highlights these incidents of police violence, where you could go and click on the particular location and you would see videos of what was happening. You would hear testimonials from folks on the ground. You could read case studies and then action that could be taken in the context of international human rights law. So you can imagine that this is not very easy work. It can be very triggering for individuals doing this work. So we pay very close attention to the wellness of the research teams, but also to the individuals that we are interacting with, because these are individuals who are going through trauma themselves, and we want to ensure their wellness and well-being. But this research is so critical to getting others to take action. And this is important because this is very similar to sister cities in terms of our engagement internationally. So with this information on mapping police violence across the United States, in this next slide, you see action that was taken globally through the Amnesty International movement. So we had more than 1 million global actions focused on police violence in the United States recently. This is driven by our work at AI's Amnesty International USA, but we have our offices in the International Secretariat in London taking both written action letters and petitions that are being signed, but also taking actions online and either getting involved in protests or calls and reaching out to decision makers. So here you see Amnesty International, Denmark, France, Finland, Italy, Greece, Norway, Korea, Spain, and the United States taking action on behalf of human rights violations in the United States, reaching out to embassies, decision makers in their country, but also within the United States, calling for action to address these human rights violations. I'd like to give you another example in this next slide of a very, very popular activity that we do across the global movement. And this is called Right for Rights. These are letter writing campaigns that are enormously successful. So the logo of Amnesty International is a candle against the backdrop of barbed wire. And what we are focusing on are prisoners of conscience who, once imprisoned, when they receive letters of support from Amnesty activists and members, are able to see the light in the darkness that they're experiencing at that time. And this is what the candle symbolizes for us. So in the first example, our community can't wait any longer. This is work around an indigenous Native American group in Canada. In the second example, it's to free a prisoner of conscience in Myanmar. And the third example was an individual in Chile who had been blinded by the police when he stood up for his human rights. So we take these cases and we mobilize our members to write letters both to the individuals who are being wronged, but also to officials. And what impact does a letter have? What difference does it make? And this next slide, you see in our most recent campaign, Right for Rights campaign, that we had more than 6 million actions generated worldwide. So globally, there's a selection process of 10 human rights violation cases, and we mobilize the global movement to write letters around those cases. In our offices here in the United States, we generated approximately 552,000 actions, and the only other section or office that generated more actions than us was France. We have a high level of student participation. We have academic advisors and teachers who are doing letter writing campaigns with their students in the classroom. And we hear a lot from the value that this is in terms of putting these students on a lifelong path to engagement on human rights and international engagement and Amnesty International. And when I reflect on this, I really think of Sister Cities International. So I'd like to talk a little bit on this next slide about some of the connections between citizen diplomats and human rights. And I stole this from your website, because the ultimate destination is understanding. You know, the way that Amnesty International gets to mobilize individuals to take action is to understand the value and importance of human rights to us all here in the United States and globally. And through having a full understanding and appreciation of others and our own rights, we're able to mobilize our activists to take action. I remember when I was with Sister Cities, I very often got asked the question, what is a citizen diplomat, and can anybody be a citizen diplomat? This is the beauty of the work that you do through Sister Cities International. It is for ordinary citizens. Anyone can be a citizen diplomat. And similarly, anyone can be a human rights defender with Amnesty International. It really is about anyone seeing the the humanity in shared understanding and appreciation. It's a grassroots, volunteer-driven movement similar to Sister Cities International. It is based on international engagement. We are Amnesty International. So together we look at human rights violations in the United States. Globally, we mobilize US activists to take action for violations abroad. But as you have seen with me, we also have a number of colleagues and friends overseas who are mobilizing for our rights in the United States. I remember through the work at Sister Cities International, and in particular when we had our annual conference in Houston, that we were doing a lot of work around disinformation, working with the State Department and through the Sister Cities International movement to think about lawyers, to think about journalists, to think about the role of citizens in combating disinformation. And there were a few things that we talked about that were important. The importance of human networks, the importance of remaining positive in the midst of disinformation and violations that may be occurring, the importance of staying on these issues for a long period of time, playing the long game, why it continued to be very important for us to engage the next generation and also to provide the context in terms of the rule of law, the role of media, what it means to mobilize citizens, what does it mean to have exchange programs, to visit, and all of that is important. So this point around combating disinformation is one that resonates with Amnesty International and with Sister Cities also. It's across the country, so it's in rural areas, urban areas, and across the world. And it really is looking at how we can center the experiences of individuals and different communities in a shared humanity, so shared understanding and appreciation of what it means to connect on an individual basis, which is very much a linchpin of what we do with Sister Cities International and with Amnesty International. And on this next slide, I'm reminded, and there's Mary Palico in the center there, of the conversations that we have in the context of sister cities and talking about citizens and soft power, and how do you make the hard case for soft power of citizen diplomacy, which is at the heart of Sister Cities and the work that we do through Sister Cities. And it's very similar for us at Amnesty International. It's a question of people power. How do we mobilize this to do good and to be that force for good in the world? So very important as when we look at diplomacy, culture, history, and what it means to mobilize average citizens. On this next slide, I'm reminded of the discussions that we had when I was with Sister Cities International and the degree to which Sister Cities might be looking at human rights violations. And even though Sister Cities International is not a human rights organization per se, we know that human rights violations are issues that we see in our cities that affect the work that we do. And we had done a number of sessions on human trafficking in the United States and what it meant for how Sister Cities International engaged with partners. So this is an area that we work on in Amnesty International, and we work to bring together ambassadors, the airline industry, police officers, task forces. Here you have examples of rabbis for human rights, the religious community, and also journalists. So very much a recognition that these issues are issues that are critical to our respective communities and that we bring folks together. So I'd like to just end and wrap up by looking at the next couple of slides where we talk about your sister cities and what does it mean. So you have a wonderful array of partners, and I just wanted to highlight for you very briefly some of the human rights issues in some of your sister city countries. So if you look on the next slide, we know that we do an analysis of human rights violations in various countries. And most recently in Hungary, there was a parliamentary decision not to ratify a political declaration on violence against women and on domestic violence. So we identified that as an issue in Hungary and are mobilizing activists around that. In Mexico, in the next slide, we have been documenting the human rights violations against women and what are the conditions and the rights of women, and it also looking at the role of essential workers during the COVID pandemic and the degree to which their rights are not being protected. So that's one of your sister city countries. And then France, on the next slide, we most recently released a report looking at the excessive use of force by police in France and the degree to which human rights defenders are not protected under the law, and that if they are protesting publicly, that the police is at liberty to take them up without any justification. So there were some accountability measures around this. So I see lots of parallels between our movements, between the work and our mutual interests. And I'd just like to end with this final slide, just letting you know how can you find out more about what we do at amnestyusa.org. You'll get resources on what action you can take, how you can get involved in your community, what are some advocacy opportunities, what events we have planned, what are opportunities for you to be a leader, how you can join the movement, support, and leverage the work and your interests through sister cities in being aligned with Amnesty International. So I look forward to chatting further.
Let me thank you so much, Roger Mark. We're not going to let you go yet, though. Wow, my head's just kind of exploded with all the information you shared, and I knew you would be excellent at this, so thank you for doing it. Let me introduce now Greg Jackson, our chair-elect of the Board of Directors, and Greg also serves on the National Board of Directors of Sister Cities International. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A box, and if you have others you'd like to put in there, that come up during this conversation, feel free to do so, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. Greg, it's all yours.
Thank you, May. And Roger Mark, thank you for that very interesting and very informative presentation. And I'd also like to express thanks to you and to all of those involved in Amnesty International for the amazing work that you do to advance the human rights of all people. So the first question we had was, you were just talking about the similarities between Fort Worth Sister Cities and Sister Cities International and Amnesty International. What can we as members and supporters of Sister Cities do to get the word out to our networks about Amnesty International?
I think that there are a few things. Number one, I know that Sister Cities International and Sister Cities International Fort Worth has a very strong program and engagement with students. We have a very strong youth collective, and many of our programs are at the high school level, at the college level. We produce curricula, our human rights education curricula, and this is all available online, whereby you can learn about human rights and how it relates to current issues. But most importantly, it's an opportunity to engage students who are involved in Sister Cities International, who would be be interested in looking at ways that they could also get involved through social justice issues. And that's part of what Amnesty International offers. Now, we have local groups throughout the country. We have country specialists. We have folks who in our leadership structure are very involved in particular thematic issues. So there are opportunities to get engaged. Those are all listed on the website that I provided earlier. We have an event coming up in a couple months called Banned Books, whereby we look at texts and materials, newspaper articles, books that have been banned in specific countries because they talk about rights. So we organize conversations around these banned books. We meet the authors, we hear from them directly, and we get to find out more about the conditions under which they can operate and do their work. And I would say, finally, get engaged. Write a letter, have a conversation. Through Sister Cities, you're interested in international connections. So this is another dimension of that understanding and connectivity. And I would say, you know, in the United States context, we may talk about civil rights, and it's not always human rights, but there's a lot of overlap there. So also look for the opportunities to engage in social justice work within the United States and within your local community.
Thank you. What does Amnesty International work closely with journalists? And if so, is the press considered a resource for Amnesty International?
Absolutely. We work quite closely with journalists. A number of our cases around prisoners of conscience involve journalists who have been imprisoned for their writings, for the work that they do, for their investigative journalism. So we, through our other country offices, we work closely with those journalists in country. We very specifically work to protect the right of freedom of expression and investigation. So we, even around the Black Lives Matter protests, we do have cases of journalists who have turned up just to record and write on what's happening, and they have been held by authorities and thrown into a prison. We have looked at their work and have used their work as documentation for case studies and for research, in addition to working to free them and to look at the conditions under which they have been imprisoned. So we work on their cases, we recognize the importance of their work, and we do use them as a resource. It's always verified. It's not an exclusive source, but it is one source of verification.
Another question, what types of obstacles does Amnesty International face, if any, from the governments of individual countries and the like?
So because Amnesty International is the oldest and largest human rights organization, the brand is well known, it's very visible. So if Amnesty shows up in a space, the government pays attention. Invariably, there are times that the government is not in agreement with the work that Amnesty puts forward. And I'll give you an example. Most recently, the government in India closed down the Amnesty office. They froze the assets of their office in India and completely shut down operations. It's not the first time, it's the second time that has happened in India. But if a government is perceiving the threat of Amnesty's work, there can be direct retaliation. So we do have those instances, and we maintain the neutrality of the information and the work that we're doing. It's based on the international human rights law. That's the framework, and we use that for accountability. And there are times that we're able to work with governments in a very positive way. We maintain our independence from government. We accept no government funding. So that helps us maintain our independence, but it allows us to show up with some authenticity when we show up in these spaces. And like Sister Cities International, because we're dealing with average citizens who will be the constituents of governments, and not just at a national level, at a local level, that allows us to have some additional leverage.
Very interesting. Next question, is Amnesty International working on issues involving COVID-19 or the dissemination of vaccines worldwide?
We are. So we are not a service provider. We're not working per se on the dissemination of vaccines. So what we have been working on is the recognition of health as a human rights issue. And in that context, we have been looking at COVID-19 and vaccines. So there are a few things that we have done in that context. We're looking at vaccine distribution and the equitable sharing of vaccines globally. We're looking at trade agreements that allows for technology transfer and information sharing around vaccine development and the degree to which that is in the public good and in the public interest. So there is some articulation of trade agreements and legislation around those issues. In the context of the pandemic, we have also very specifically looked at the rights of frontline workers, particularly health workers, and what are their rights during this time, and what does it mean for the right to employment, the right to safe employment, and the necessity for safety protocols. We have also done a body of work around the pandemic and the degree to which governments may use the pandemic as an excuse to shut down disagreement from any civil society. So there are opportunities when the government will impose a curfew and say it's because of the pandemic, but it's really an attempt to shut down a particular community or voice or newspaper. So we investigate those situations and determine the degree to which this is in the interest of public health in the context of a pandemic. What are the legal parameters, and to which degree there's some overreach. So it's an overall comprehensive strategy that's looking at human rights in the context of a pandemic. You know, what is there abuse of laws or the condition of the situation, the degree to which rights are being protected, the degree to which rights are being violated, and what it means when we get to vaccine distribution globally and in terms of equity questions.
Thank you. How effective is Amnesty International in countries like China and Russia in combating human rights violations in those countries?
So, of course, those are the big ones. They're not the only ones, but of course, very, very prominent. What we know is that when Amnesty International shows up, because it comes with such a strong citizen base, that they do pay attention. At times, it can produce a backlash on the activists, but what's important is that we convey that all eyes are on that particular issue. So Amnesty serves to shed a light, the candle, in those situations so that we can clarify what is happening and bring attention to government's actions. So we don't do this in isolation. We work in partnership. So in China, for example, we've worked on the question around the Uyghurs, and that minority population and the degree to which the Chinese government is putting them into forced camps. And what does that mean in terms of their violation of that minority group? So we look at those kinds of issues, we examine it, we push, and we work with others and other governments. And there are times that we are successful, and there are times that we just need to continue pushing to shed a light on what's happening. What is important is that overall, if Amnesty is involved, we know that attention will be brought to an issue, and that there is enough of a credibility of the basis for the work through the research, and that the citizen engagement means that the authorities in China and Russia will pay attention. And there are times that they will be very specific attempts to discredit the information that is put out there as a result. And that's an indication that the organization and the movement is having an impact. So there are times we're very successful. There are times it is a challenge, and we rely on the support of our members and our activists in those countries to let us know how we can best be of service. We are very careful and mindful that we are here in the United States, and we may not know all that is happening on the ground in those geographies. So we rely on the leads and the information of those who are closest to the ground. There are things that we can verify digitally, but we need to rely on those who are closest, and we will follow their leads in terms of what actions to take. We also don't want to disproportionately put their lives at risk. So there's always a risk calculation. This is not just operating in a vacuum and standing up for very idealistic rights. Very often, you can be putting someone's life on the line. So it's a very careful determination of when we should step in, following the lead of our individuals who are closest to the impacts, and then mobilizing the global movement.
During your PowerPoint presentation, you mentioned, you used the word actions a couple of times when discussing the activism outcomes. So what are actions?
Yeah, that's a good question. So actions are both online and offline actions. So an offline action could be, hi, Mary. An offline action can be someone writing a letter, showing up in protests in the street. It can be someone doing a briefing with an ambassador. It could be someone going to the Hill. It could be a student group holding a rally on campus. It can be someone holding a concert to bring attention to an issue. We work with celebrities, we work with artists. It could be someone sitting down in the living room and having a discussion with their family on this. We have lots of groups who meet in churches and have discussions. So all of that is an action, and that is offline actions. Now, there are things that you can do online. You send a petition. We have, to a certain degree, we have clicktivists, so activists who click on actions, and these are letters, petitions, support. You will get a script to call authorities in a detention center. So there are things that you do online that's all electronically driven, and we tie that to the impact that it has, and then we communicate that with the activists. So all those are actions, the online and offline actions. And I would say generally for Amnesty International, we're not taking very radical actions. You will hear some environmental groups like Greenpeace that will do almost military actions. We don't do that. Those kinds of actions. They're very clear lines for us that we will not cross. We will not, we will not go in a policymaker's home or neighborhood, for example. That's a red line. We will not get involved in their spaces with their families, for example. That's a no-no. So they're very clear guidelines of the types of actions that we would encourage.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think it's almost time to wrap this all up, so I'm going to jump in here right now. And Roger Mark, thank you so much. Not only did you wove that message so well into what we do, and knowing us so well, I can understand how you were able to do that. But it's wonderful information for all of us to have. And in fact, one of the things Mary commented on was, we need to get you in front of more country reps that really are in all of these countries doing the work of Sister Cities International. So thank you so much for joining us. All you out there, Roger Mark has been to Fort Worth before, and I have not given up on getting him back here. You see why he's such an entertaining speaker as well, and who doesn't love that voice? So thank you, Roger Mark. I hope to see you in person someday soon. And Greg, thank you for moderating the session for us once again. I hope all of you enjoyed this International Speaker Series. Our next one is coming up in October 4th, and it will be on cybersecurity, which is kind of a hot topic right now, and this will be more focused on individual cybersecurity. So save that date. If you're not a member yet, please join us. And once again, I just thank you for being with us, and everyone have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.